There are 32 teams in the NHL, including the Calgary Flames. Here's what they can learn from the other 31.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Flames. Hosting today, Nick Zararis. Jess has no voice. We were going to attempt to record, but Jess's voice just would not cooperate. More than likely not, Jess will be back tomorrow. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. This is Locked On Flames, where we've got you and the Calgary Flames covered every single today. And today's show, we are going to talk about something a little nebulous, something a little big picture, just a thinking exercise, something that the Flames can learn from every other team in the NHL, even the bad ones. There are lessons you can take away from good teams, from bad teams. All across the board, there are lessons you can learn. They can be cautionary, or you can be leaning over your desk and scribbling down what they did, because this is a very competitive league. And I know Craig Conroy has really tried to go about doing things the right way by his players, by the people he's trading with. And it's nice to be nice. Ideally, everybody would be nice to each other. But being that everyone isn't nice to each other, sometimes you are going to have to steal other people's ideas. So we're going to progress alphabetically through alphabetical order. We're going to bounce around, and we are going to have ourselves a nice in-depth conversation. Number one. First up, alphabetical order, the Anaheim Ducks. What can we learn from the Anaheim Ducks? Don't be afraid to take your swing. The Ducks took Leo Carlsson in the draft last year. He was an underager, only turning 18 last year, 19 now. Picked second overall. In my head, I can't believe someone didn't take Adam Fantilli second overall, who we'll talk about the Blue Jackets in a little bit in the cautionary section. But as far as the Ducks, if you have a guy in mind and you think you see something in him that other people don't, that's fine. That's something Jess and I have talked about a lot on the show over the last few weeks as far as talent identification, pro and amateur scouting. If you see a guy toiling away or who's really good at one thing in another place and it isn't being put in a position to utilize it, go for it. I think Carlsson has a lot of upside. He was a little bit less of a safe pick than Fantilli or some of the other guys that were in that draft. But as far as a lesson from the Ducks, have your convictions about a player, stick to them, take your swing. Go out there and get a player you think can be franchise altering. That's the lesson from the Anaheim Ducks. Number two, the Arizona Coyotes. Be aggressive with your cap space. You've seen it repeatedly. The Coyotes are very willing to take on your bad contracts if you give them a draft pick to do it. The Rangers gave them 2 seconds to take away Patrick Nemeth. The Islanders at one point gave them multiple picks to take away Andrew Ladd. Weaponize your cap space, buy draft picks. It is an invaluable resource, especially now that we think the Flames are going to take a step back and not be as competitive and not be in a position where they're going to be pushing for a playoff spot. So they can afford to roster some players who are overpaid, older, maybe not even playing at all and are LTIR'd. But for the purposes of getting their money and going up to the ceiling and getting some draft picks, when you are in this period, your roster spots, if you don't have a prospect you want for a roster spot, go take a draft pick to roster a bad player for half a season or two. Get those draft picks, keep churning over the organization and remodeling it in your image. Number three, the Boston Bruins. Culture matters. The Bruins have done a really strong job of passing leadership along in that organization, from Chara to Bergeron, now to Marchand, and eventually it'll be to Charlie McAvoy. When you have guys in a place for a long, extended period of time, they begin to set a standard. That standard gets defined, and that's infectious. Guys don't want to disappoint somebody like that. And a lot of people had skepticism about somebody like Marchand, who has a little bit of a checkered past, who's been involved in some on-ice incidents, has rubbed people the wrong way. but the guys on that team will go to war for him any day. That's something the Flames, as we look towards the future, Backlund's going to be under contract for a couple more seasons now. If Backlund's going to be the transitional captain to whoever, what we keep talking about, whatever the next version of the Flames is going to look like, the captain of that team, that's somebody who's going to set the tone that a Chara, a Bergeron, a Marchand is going to eventually. Next up, the Buffalo Sabres. Rebuilding is a great concept. You actually have to have a plan to get out of your rebuild. The closest the Sabres have gotten to getting out of their rebuild was the offseason they signed Taylor Hall, and they traded him anyway because it didn't end up working out. It was a good idea to be aggressive, to go out and add a player like Taylor Hall, especially in a depressed market where he wasn't going to be able to get close to his value. Hall's been traded 2 times since that contract, first from Buffalo to Boston and then from Boston to Chicago. You got to be able to, you have to accumulate young talent, which the Sabres have done a reasonable job of. Devin Levy, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, the 2 defensemen, Power and Dahlin, are pretty good. They got Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat. I like Dylan Cousins. They've still got Tage Thompson. There are enough guys on that team where you feel reasonably okay that if they hit on something on top of what they already have, they could be pretty competitive. The Flames are next in alphabetical order. We'll save the Flames for last. The Carolina Hurricanes, develop your own guys. The Hurricanes have saved a lot of money over the years by developing their own pieces in-house. And then as soon as those guys become expensive, flipping them. The Hurricanes are hamstrung because their owner doesn't want to invest long-term in guys. He would rather remain liquid and be able to turn players into assets, turn those assets into other players, and keep kicking that can down the road and keep getting the team younger, saving money, and running the team a little bit more like a traditional business as opposed to a hockey team. The Blackhawks got to get lucky sometimes. Not every draft is going to have a Connor Bedard, but it does take a little bit of luck to win the lottery, even when you have good odds. The Flames are going to need a little bit of luck in a lottery at some point in the next couple of seasons if they're going to get the caliber of player they need to alter the direction of this franchise. The Avalanche, it doesn't come together right away. I talk about this all of the time. This is one of my favorite talking points because I think it's really, really overlooked when we're talking about the scope of a hockey team. Gabriel Landeskog was drafted in 2011. The Avalanche did not win a Stanley Cup until 2022. The Flames could draft somebody this upcoming draft in June, and maybe the Flames don't win a cup with him for 10, 11 years. It takes time to put together the right group. You're going to need to pick a lot of quality players up over an extended period of time and build that culture that we were talking about before in relation to the Bruins, so that when the time comes, when you have your Landeskog, then you can add a McKinnon, you can add a McCarr, you can add a Rantanen, you can add the aforementioned Bowen Byram, who's now in Buffalo. You can trade for a Casey Middlestat. You can bring in guys like Jonathan Drouin and Val Nichushkin because you feel your team is good enough that it's going to be able to get something out of those guys that they weren't in other places. Next up, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Do your due diligence and actually do your due diligence. Do not just talk to people who have good things to say about your idea. If they talk to anybody who had a negative experience with Mike Babcock prior to hiring Mike Babcock, they might not have wasted an entire season. It's really straightforward. The Blue Jackets wasted an entire season because their hockey men swore they knew better than everybody else, and they paid for it. They have wasted an entire season, and Jarmo Kakalainen got fired for it. We'll squeeze one more in here before we take our first break. The Dallas Stars, got to hit on your draft picks. The Stars entirely transformed their roster with a handful of draft picks. Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, Jake Ottinger. Those 4 guys fundamentally transformed this roster. And they've drafted Logan Stankoven. They have drafted Thomas Harley. They have managed to facilitate guys getting more out of guys who are already here. I didn't even mention Wyatt Johnston, another recent draft pick who's been nothing but great for them. He really helped Jamie Benn last year kind of turn back the clock, and Ben and Sagan aren't what they used to be, but they're still relatively effective because of the supporting cast they've built around those guys. And coming up next, we will continue in alphabetical order. The Red Wings are up next, but first we are going to take a quick break. The sports calendar is absolutely loaded. We are about to enter the best time of the year. We're going to have the NHL playoffs. We're going to have the NBA playoffs. We're going to have regular season baseball. We're going to have the NFL draft. We're going to have the Masters. We've got Formula One going. We've got NASCAR going. We're going to have pretty much everything in some capacity operating and coexisting at the same time on the sports calendar. This is the best time of year, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet March Madness. We got a Final Four this upcoming weekend. Are you in on NC State? MLB? Don't bet on the Mets. If you respect your money, do not bet on the Mets. The NHL? I would not advise betting on the Calgary Flames. Maybe fade the Calgary Flames if you're looking for some action involving your beloved Flames. And so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank everybody who's hanging out here on this Tuesday afternoon while I hold down the fort for Jess. Hopefully her voice is back and we're back to our regularly scheduled programming on Wednesday. But first, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Now, back to our lessons from around the league. The Detroit Red Wings. What can the Calgary Flames learn from the Red Wings? Don't spend in free agency. The Red Wings signed a bunch of okay guys. You know, Andrew Kopp's a decent hockey player. Ben Sherratt has some value in hockey, but those are not the type of guys you add to a team in free agency and expect it to get you particularly close. Those are... You shop in free agency if you need one or two things to put you over the top. If you need one more top 9 winger, if you need a fourth defenseman, if you need a backup goalie, that's where free agency can help you. If you're going out there to try and get top 6 forwards, most of the time you're going to be getting a third liner from a good team and playing him more minutes and a bigger responsibility, and you just don't know if they're going to be able to make that leap. That's your apprehension. Edmonton Oilers. Goaltending matters. There are a few teams we could say goaltending matters. The Leafs, Carolina, who we did already, but the Oilers' biggest shortcoming has been goaltending. I know there are questions about their bottom 6, about their defense. If they have league average goaltending, that's a team that can win the Stanley Cup. They cannot depend on league average goaltending from Stuart Skinner in the postseason. If you will recall, in that first round series against the Kings last year, Stuart Skinner played so poorly, there was genuine clamoring amongst Oiler fans for Jack Campbell to get NHL playoff games. That's how bad it got in Edmonton. Try and get off the goalie carousel as soon as you can. That is your reason you maybe don't trade Jacob Markstrom just yet. Florida Panthers. Similarly to the Anaheim Ducks, take a swing. If there is a disgruntled player available in a trade, you move heaven and earth. If it's a player that's in that upper echelon, that's one of the 10, 15, 20, even 30 best players in the entire sport, you do anything. You got to remember, Jonathan Huberdeau had 115 points. Mackenzie Weegar's an analytics darling and a really strong defender. There was no hesitation on the Panthers' part to turn those two guys into Matthew Tkachuk. And I know a lot of people are reticent to give up the 2 quarters for 50 cents and think to themselves, well, I'm giving up more assets for one guy. Is one guy really going to be more impactful than 2? Case in point, what has happened in Florida the last 2 years? What has happened in Calgary the last 2 years? The LA Kings. This is the cautionary side of that tale. Just because you're a playoff team does not mean you are close to winning a Stanley Cup. The Kings have made the playoffs a couple years in a row now. They have a nice team. I like a lot of their pieces. They're a good regular season group. I think they have a little bit more. I think there's a little bit of room for them to kind of improve from where they are, but I don't think the Kings can substantially improve their roster based on where they have money tied up, who they have it tied up in. So they're going to be relying on the guys they have to take leaps. And when you have a veteran team that's really only got a handful of young guys, I know Quentin Byfield's really started to put it together and show flashes of an elite player, but the Kings are really the 7th best team in the West, and they're not particularly close to beating any of the 6 teams ahead of them in terms of talent. Minnesota Wild. Sometimes you can be good. It's not good enough. The Wild have been a pretty consistently good franchise in the regular season over the last decade. You go and look at their hockey reference and you go look at their franchise history. They've made the playoffs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Of the last 10 years, they have made the playoffs 8 of the last 10. In those 10 years, they have only won a playoff series twice. They have not gotten past the first round since, I got to do my math here. Hang on. They have not gotten out of the first round since 2015. The NHL of 2015 is a long time ago. The Wild, good regular season team, above average talent in that lineup. Goaltending, an issue. Health of the defense. Jared Spurgeon hasn't played this year. Big issue. That is a good team that wants to be great, but doesn't have the horses to do it. Next up, Montreal. Patience is a virtue. The Flames might be 3, 4, 5 years before they return to being a serious Stanley Cup contender. And Montreal is in the early stages of this. They made the Cup final in 2021 in that very weird season where they represented the Canada division, and then the West where they beat Vegas in the conference final and went to the final and then lost to Tampa Bay. They were outclassed. Tampa Bay is a significantly better team, but Montreal really caught lightning in a bottle there. They fired Dominic Ducharme. They brought in Martin St. Louis. They are developing. They are drafting. They have 6 or 7 defensemen who more likely than not are going to push for roster spots next season. So they're probably going to trade 1 or 2 of those guys for forwards. They've gone and traded for Kirby Dach. They have since gotten better production of Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. Samuel Montembeault might be a goalie in a tandem, but we're under no illusions the Canadians are ready to make a leap. They need significantly more talent and significantly more NHL experience. The Canadians are probably 2 years away from being where somebody like Buffalo is right now, where if they don't make the playoffs, then it would be considered a disappointment. Nashville, this is one that directly applies to Calgary. The games matter. The Nashville Predators did not show up this season expected to do a whole lot. A lot of people looked at their offseason where they brought in guys like Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Schenn, and kind of rolled their eyes at what Barry Trotz was doing of trying to be mediocre as opposed to bottoming out, keeping UC Saros instead of promoting Victor Askarov and turning Saros into futures. The Predators showed up with the intent of, we are a professional hockey team. We want our building to be full, and we are going to make the playoffs through hard work and determination. Not a lot of talent. That Predators team is a handful of guys playing really large roles, and then a couple of supporting ancillary guys who are treading water reasonably well. But that's something the Flames can do. They're guys like Kadri, Huberdeau, Weir, Anderson, Backlund, Mangiapane, Coleman. Those guys can show up, bust their butts, and give you something to feel good about as a team. And maybe, like Jess and I were talking about the other day, maybe that's the path. Maybe that's how the Flames get back to the postseason sooner than expected, is by outworking everybody. It's not the most glamorous and it's not the prettiest way. We're going to try and squeeze in 2 more before we have to take our second and final break of the episode. The New Jersey Devils. Reconstruction is not linear. The Devils looked like they were poised to be Stanley Cup contenders for the better part of the next decade after beating the Rangers in an upset in round 1 not in an upset. The Devils were the home team in that series, but a lot of people picked the Rangers to win. The Devils are obviously going to miss the playoffs this year. Their goaltending was abysmal. Lindy Ruff got fired. They have played 2 rookie defensemen an unconscionable amount of minutes. Dougie Hamilton hasn't played since the weekend of American Thanksgiving. Everything that could go wrong for the Devils went wrong this year. I expect the Devils to be back next year. I expect them to trade for a goalie or go out and acquire a goalie of some kind in the offseason and see if they upgrade their coach from Travis Green to maybe somebody like Jay Woodcroft or Craig Berube, somebody who has a little bit more of a track record of success at the NHL level. And then real quick, the New York Islanders. You can be successful and still not win the Stanley Cup. There isn't an Islander fan on the planet who doesn't think about 2020 and 2021. I talk to a lot of Islander fans pretty frequently. They're still pretty convinced they should have beaten Tampa in 2021, and they know they would have beaten Montreal in the Cup final, and they feel they should have won the Stanley Cup. They those two Islander teams are going to be immortalized in the Islander community. So even if the Flames do find the conference final run, a second round where they go 7 games against a better team, those types of experiences, those matter to a fan base. And we will be right back after this. We are in the home stretch of the NHL season, Flames fans. Season probably hasn't gone as you expected. You probably thought the Flames would either be a little bit closer to a playoff spot or a little bit closer to the lottery. They're in that dreaded middle where no one wants them to be. And regardless of where the Flames are in the standings, I want to remind you, you could win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cast in daily fantasy hockey contests. If I was trying 100 times my money, I'd be looking at the bankable stars, guys like Kucherov, Panarin, McKinnon, Austin Matthews, McDavid, Draisaitl, the stars of the game, the known money respecters who always show up in big moments. Fans can also play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, and college football on Sleeper. Entries can be made in under a minute with just a couple taps. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Crosby, McKinnon, Connor Bedard, Connor McDavid, or the surging Alex Ovechkin will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Flames fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Start paying attention, nail those picks, win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for detail and locational availability. We are in the home stretch of today's Tuesday episode of Locked On Flames. We have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 teams to get through. Let's make it happen. The New York Rangers, sometimes you got to get lucky. I know I used that before in regards to the Blackhawks, but the Rangers' luck, as Jess and I talked about yesterday, next level. Adam Fox forced his way there. Jacob Trouba leveraged his way there. Artemi Panarin chose to go there. Igor Shesterkin marinated in the KHL for half a decade before coming over from Russia. The Rangers had a lot of things line up, and then they picked second and first in consecutive drafts. Luck is a part of this as much as you resent that as a sports fan. The Senators. Rebuilding is hard. The Senators have accrued a decent pool of talent. I like Tim Stützle. I like Brady Tkachuk. I like Jake Sanderson. I like Jacob Chychrun. I like Thomas Chabot. I love Claude Giroux. They have a good group of guys, and the results haven't been there. It's hard to put pieces together, and sometimes you got to acknowledge you can have a bunch of good players, but if they don't gel, they do not gel. The Flyers, similarly to Nashville, show up, make it happen, and prove everyone wrong. The Flyers have no business being in a playoff spot with 2 weeks to go in the regular season. John Tortorella doesn't care. That team is going to make the playoffs. That fan base, it has a little bit of juice. They got a little pep in their step. They feel good about Danny Briere as the general manager. That's a team that's probably 2 or 3 years away from being serious Stanley Cup contenders, but they're establishing the bones, the foundation of a strong team. You look at Tortorella, other than Columbus, and that's kind of what happens. He elevates groups and gets them ready for the coach that brings them to the next tier. The Rangers stick out in particular, where he took over for Tom Rennie, a team of veterans that wasn't really that good, and he marshaled the Rangers along, and then Alain Vigneault took over, kind of brought them to that next tier. Pittsburgh. You'll always have the memories. The Penguins have nothing to play for. Sidney Crosby only plays out of spite at this point to try and drag that team along. Had a nice game against the Rangers last night, but Pittsburgh has the memories. San Jose, it's never too early to pull the escape hatch. Mike Greer is not doing a great job as general manager of that team. I worry about the long-term direction of the Sharks, considering how poorly he's done in the return for some of these trades. I don't know how much longer he's going to get to try and fix this mess, but they have not a lot of talent They don't have a copious amount of assets to improve their team, but time will tell. The Kraken. Eventually, you do have to play some chips. The Kraken have a ton of cap space. They've maintained a lot of their draft picks. They did not get the Vegas kind of draft where they got like 2 or 3 stars who blossomed in bigger roles. Kraken have a fine team. They have a lot of good individual players. Nobody great. Maybe Shane Wright can be great. Maybe Matty Beniers can be great. But until that happens, they're too far away to take seriously. The Blues, you got to be honest with yourself. That's the lesson. The Flames were honest with themselves. They knew they weren't a playoff team. The Blues haven't. The Blues held on to guys like Torrey Krug, like Pavel Buchnevich, dare I say like Jordan Kyrou, who they could have gotten really good returns for at this deadline, but opted not to do that. So they don't want to accept they're past their window of contention, but they're going to keep trying. Tampa Bay, got to have the dogs. Kucherov, Point, Stamkos, Hedman, Vasilevsky. That's 5 guys. They'll make a series out of it, whoever they play in the first round. If it's the Rangers, the Bruins, the Leafs, all of those teams have more depth. The Lightning have guts, and they got guys who know what it takes to win, and that does matter. They beat the hell out of the Rangers 3 weeks ago on a Thursday night in a game the Rangers were in relatively good control of for a good swaths of the game. Toronto, goaltending, depth. We'll go with depth because we already did goaltending for Edmonton. The Leafs don't have a good bottom 6. They rely on their top guys to do too much. When those top guys don't score, the bottom 6 does not have the facilities to generate the offense commensurate with winning games. It's really that straightforward. The Canucks, got to hit on your picks. Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Demko. That is the core of this group. You can throw Brock Besser in there, sure, but they've swung trades for guys like JT Miller, like Philip Roenick, good ancillary supporting pieces to help that along. Drafted good players like Nils Höglander, who I in particular enjoy. The Canucks have had this coming for a while. Guys like Pettersson, guys like JT Miller, they don't get held down forever. It's a testament to just how bad things were at points in Vancouver that those guys haven't been to the playoffs in a handful of seasons since the bubble. They'll be back this year. I don't know if they're capable of going on a deep playoff run just because they don't have a ton of experience. And Thatcher Demko very clearly dinged up as he sits on LTIR at the time of this recording. Vegas Golden Knights, you're not here to make friends. It's the easiest lesson in the book. They caught a whole lot of flack for giving away Marc-Andre Fleury, for giving away Max Pacioretty, for not treating those guys right. They won the Stanley Cup. They don't care. They got Jack Eichel. They got Mark Stone. They traded for Noah Hannafin. They traded for Tomas Hertl. They don't care. They're in the business of winning championships. They don't care about feelings. The Washington Capitals. Sometimes it's okay to have fun. The Capitals are just having fun at this point. Guys like Connor McMichael, guys like Protas, guys like Dylan Strome, Sonny Milano, guys not blue chip, not high first round picks, and other in the case of Strome, but this is the first time he's really, really succeeded, thrived. And those guys are playing a nice supporting role when TJ Oshie's healthy, when Tom Wilson's not suspended, and when he's healthy, when Ovechkin is playing well. They're all there for the ride. They just want to be a part of helping Ovechkin chase down Gretzky. The vibes do matter. And then in Winnipeg, maybe you can teach an old dog new tricks. I'm a little weary of that group. They've really kind of struggled down the stretch here. They haven't played particularly well in the last month. I want to say they're sitting at something horrendous in their last 10 games, like 2-8-0, something like that. Where are the Jets? They're 4-5-1 in their last 10. Okay, I was a little hyperbolic in my assessment, but Hellebuyck's great. Josh Morrissey is great. Nick Ehlers is one of my favorite players in the entire league to watch. If they can get a little bit more out of guys like Mark Scheifele, out of guys like Neil Pionk, maybe they can hang around. The Jets are not going to be an easy out. They're probably not a Stanley Cup contender, but they've got talent, and they were able to dig themselves out of the hole they were in when Paul Maurice resigned that post 2 years ago. Woo! That's a lot of talking. That was a crisp 30 minutes of Locked On Flames. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you could be so kind, leave the show a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. That'll do it for this edition of Locked On Flames. Hopefully, Jess will be back to join me tomorrow and she has her voice. See you guys then.